Okay, so yes, it's been a while since we've been over here. But he's up now. All of them are up. I'm still working on the patterns. Oh, good heavens. Yes, it's a big order to fill. Um, so here's the thing. It's been a while since I've done a person in history, since I've talked about a person in history. That's the better wording for it. Right words, that would be delightful. I found this particular person just by pure chance. I was looking for something completely different, came across this person, and I have got to talk about her because, oh my goodness, she is a firecracker. I mean, I'm a fan. I'm an absolute fan. So we're going to talk about her. Now, one thing I want to point out, because I'm seeing these comments quite a bit on the the history videos, are people complaining about how, well, it's obvious that you're just reading off of Wikipedia and you're just giving a Wikipedia thing. I'm not going to let you guys see the top of my head looking down, reading a bunch of notes, okay? And there's going to be a list of links that you can look at. I try to give as many links as possible. Sometimes Wikipedia is all I got, okay? But I have always said that Wikipedia is my guide so that I'm looking straight ahead. So, to just deal with it. Okay, I'm sick and tired of having to delete those comments when I've never hid anything from me. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, now this particular individual, I'm not sure how it escaped my mind, but as soon as I saw her name, it took me a while. That's what I'm trying to say. At first, I was like, I think I remember her. There are still children's books written about her, and her name is Mother Jones. And if that sounds familiar, it's because of Mother Jones and the March of the Mill Children. That was the more popular one. By the time I was in middle school, that's the book that came out. The book came out when I was in middle school. But there were other, I always remember uh, teachers talking about Mother Jones and and because she's she really made her mark in history. So we're going to talk about her. And again, I will post as many links as possible, including I did find a timeline. So there's a like a museum for her as well. So I will link the website for that and everything. So, well, it'll be the timeline and then you can look around and everything. So, but so her real name is Mary Harris, and yeah, Mother Jones came a lot later. Now, she was born on the north side of Cork, Ireland. I've never been to Ireland, but from what I understand, I do have friends from Ireland, and I am told that you have to make it clear where you're from when it comes north side, south side, east side, west side. You have to make sure you say. So she's from the north side of Cork, Ireland. And she was born to Roman Catholic farmers, Richard and Ellen Harris. Now, the exact date of her birth is unknown, like the day and the month. Uh, they know the exact date when she was baptized, of course, because they document all that. It's not really uncommon to not know, you might know the year because we know because she died when she was 93. So obviously count back to that. And yeah, do all the math, which I'm not going to sit here and do that for here. I'm not that much of a math whiz. But a good example would be Clara Bow. There's some, because she's rebellious in every way possible. But when it comes to Clara Bow and her birth, it's like there's like a 5 year one, like several sources say it's this year, another source says that it's this year, and there's like a 5 year stretch. So we don't really know. It depends on who you talk to when it comes to Clara Bow. So the fact that we don't know exactly when it comes to Mary Harris, not uncommon. Absolutely not uncommon. I come across it quite a bit when I'm documenting uh, people that I restore and colorize. So, unfortunately, uh, and I actually come across it a lot later where people have found it. So hopefully, but given that Mary is more famous, I don't know, maybe it's lost to time. I hope not. Hope maybe somewhere it's documented somewhere. But yeah, at least I don't know, to know when she was baptized, the day and the month and the year, but they don't know, just cracks me up. Now, her family were victims of the potato famine, which is known as the Great Famine. If you're unfamiliar with that, I will, of course, put more information in the description box. But to be brief, this is the famine which the potato crops were affected, and there were no crops, hence famine. And as a result, a lot of families left for North America. Now, I want to make this very clear. When people were immigrating to North America, that doesn't mean that everybody was immigrating to Ellis Island, America. No, North America also means Canada. Hello. I have talked to so many people where when they hear North America, they immediately think that that just means America. It's like, no. As an American, there are those above us. You know that. Oh, good heavens. I always love my aunt was Canadian, the aunt that passed away last year, and she always joked around with it. She's like, "Yes, we are staring down at you." I miss her so much. I loved her personality. Loved her sense of humor too. Now, the reason I say all this about Canada is because Mary and her family came to Canada. And so she went to school in Toronto, a school by the name of Toronto Normal School. I guess it's not there anymore. You can, of course, correct me. But the only time I've been in Canada was British Columbia. That's where my aunt was from. So she didn't graduate. However, she did receive enough training to teach at a convent in Michigan. So now she's in America. She's 23 years old. And she hated it. She said it was depressing. uh, Pretty much, I remember being 23 years old and I had a couple jobs that were like that. It was like, oh, this is so depressing. Why am I doing this? I don't want to be here. But it brought in the money. So, but back then, you also have to consider this is the 1850s. Civil War hasn't happened yet. And a job was actually considered a career. These days it's like, we have like the fast food stuff. That's not a career. And the part-time jobs, I one of my first jobs was the shoe salesman at Sears. I guess depends on how many years. That's not really a career, but so but anyway, but back then your job was your career. And so now she moved around. She moved to Chicago and then she moved to Memphis. And as she was moving around, she at one point had she got into dressmaking to bring in some money and everything. And she actually did really well with that. And so, as I was reading up on her and this dressmaking, I was kind of surprised why she didn't just continue with the dressmaking and having like a successful dress shop, which we'll get into that in a second as to why I would think that. While she was in Memphis, in 1861, she married a gentleman by the name of George E. Jones, and he was a member as well as an organizer of the National Union of Iron Molders, and it later became something else. It doesn't exist anymore. It floundered in 1988. Um, but pretty much what it did is it represented workers who specialized in building and repairing steam engines, mills, and other manufactured goods. Um, since he was the breadwinner, the main breadwinner, the one who brought in the income, she decided to step back and just be a housemaker. Plus, they had, I think it was 4 kids. Yeah, 4 kids at that time, and unfortunately, it wasn't to last. Poor Mary. In 1867, there was a yellow fever epidemic. And this might be the epidemic I was thinking of when I did that Real Newsy Strike of 1899, and I mentioned Joseph Pulitzer, and he dug graves. This might be the epidemic that I was talking about. Um, but Mary Harris, Mary Harris Jones, she's now Jones, Mary Jones lost her husband and 4 children to this fever, to the yellow fever epidemic. They had 3 girls and 1 boy. Now, I couldn't really find much information on the kid, like how old they were, but they couldn't be very old if they got married in 61 and this is 67. So they couldn't be even 10 years old. I mean, that's just tragic. Absolutely tragic. To lose the love of your life and your little babies. They were babies. Oh, that's even worse. Um, but she didn't let that stop her. Mary then went back to Chicago Because remember, she had been into Chicago before. So she goes back to Chicago and opens up another dress shop. She's um, got this small little shop, and she caught the eye of the upper class in Chicago. Here's the thing. She lost her home, her shop, and possessions to the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, a woman by the name of Catherine O'Leary, I'll have to do a full video on this. I'll, of course, put more information in the description box. The story goes that her cow started this fire by like knocking over a lantern, something to that effect. But when you see the pictures or the illustrations, I mean, like I've seen uh documentaries on the Great Fire of 1666. And you know how a baker started the fire because of embers, you know, and all that. It's pretty much that. You think of how this fire just swept through London. It's kind of along the same lines in America's terms. I mean, the fire, you see these pictures, I'll of course put one here. It just swept through. And just like the Pudding Lane baker, one little fire, I mean, one little ember set off everything. A cow kicking over a lantern. Well, the cow was in the stable, so there used to be a rhyme that, because it seemed, if I remember correctly, our because I learned about all this in fifth grade, and it seems like there's a rhyme that goes along with it about Catherine O'Leary and her cow and everything. But yeah, so poor Mary, she loses everything. She was supposed to start all over after losing her beloved husband and her babies. And oh, that's devastating. I didn't even think of that. And till I fit the pieces together just now. They were little babies and to that epidemic. So home, shop, possessions, everything. So what's she gonna do now? As it turns out, according to her autobiography that she wrote in 1925, she talks about how this is the point where she decides to join the Knights of Labor. Now, you also have to realize that this is the Industrial Revolution. Okay. Uh, of course, the Industrial Revolution had swept through all over the world. Um, Factories are starting to take over, and just everything is changing. Everything is changing. And the other thing to recognize is that there are these like labor organizations, and you know, we're for the workers and that sort of thing. A lot of them were scams because you're always going to find those since the dawn of time. I mean, I'm sure in ancient times, you know, well, dawn of times they had hagglers, so that's one of the things I love in Life of Brian, where he's like, come on, haggle, haggle with me. You're not doing it right. So, I mean, anyway, you had all of these different unions and labor, everything. Well, Knights of Labor was one of them. And basically, they uh, were for everybody. If you were a worker, they were for you. And it was basically to um boost morale for workers. If workers were having a dispute, they would come in and, they'd show up and be like, hey, hey, hey. And well, she would organize strike if there was a problem with like worker pay and all of that. That was a big one back in the day, was the pay, because of course you had these factories going up. Well, how do you pay for these? Yeah, and so that came up quite a bit. I've been noticing that a lot. It's not so much that how do you pay for the kids, which they hardly paid them anything. No, it was more, you have these new places, the factories. So how do you pay the workers in these new places? Do you pay them the same as in any other, like a department store? What do you do? What do you do with this? I don't understand. They should have thought of that before they started opening them up, really. That's just my opinion. But, they were winging it. So whenever there was a dispute on payment or anything like that, Mary, would start to organize strikes, which weren't always a success. Most of the time, 95% of the time, they failed. They didn't go anywhere. And I have this hair that's just driving me nuts. So I'm sorry if I'm constantly, so I apologize. Now you think about this, okay? Because when I read up on her, there were people who wrote the articles, and a lot of them were saying, she's just an old biddy who's getting in the way, because she looks like a sweet old grandma, right? So, um, and by this time, you think of the 1870s, she's probably like in her 60s, I think, 50s, or yeah, probably about 50, or well, anyway, again, math, well, anyway. Um, so there were people who were actually saying, well, um she's she's just being an annoying woman, and she's not supposed to be there, it's and all that. And I think you get the idea of what they're trying to say. But you think about this. Okay, she owned her own shop. Okay, so she understands the business side of it. Plus you think of her late husband and what he did. And I'm sure he came home from work and talked to her about all this stuff, complaining about whatever happened at work and whatever. And so she's got that behind her as well. So she's not stupid to the whole labor whatever. And so to say that, well, she's just blowing hot air, I wouldn't say that. I think she has these workers, what's the proper words to use? She's on their side and she knows what they want. Uh, anyway, I think you know what I'm trying to say. She's supportive of them because she knows. I hate when it's in here, but it won't come out. Gosh darn it. So now there were times where the Knights of Labor did get into trouble. There was one instance, and I don't know if she was there. I'm not gonna say either way. There was one, it was called the Haymarket Affair of 1886. It was super violent. I mean, the things that I was reading about it was just, it started off, it was supposed to be a peaceful protest. and it was like people were getting killed, there were bombs being thrown, just and when you see like the illustrations of it, it's like, what is happening? My gosh. How did it go from peaceful protest to this? Oh, good grief. So, but the Knights of Labor uh were part of that, were inciting a lot of that, because this was a peaceful protest of workers, something or other. And I'll of course have information in the description box for you for more of that. I don't know that she was there, but she was part of that organization. So, um, now when Knights of Labor fizzled out, because it seems like I read that it died out like in the late 1880s. I don't think it reached the 1890s. But the reason that it fell apart was because they weren't getting enough people to join. I mean, like people were just not interested in coming anymore to to be part of the group anymore. So I don't know what happened there. And people were more interested in just being part of the strike, I guess. Listen, I gotta point this out too. I don't know if I did in the Newsy strike video, but they were striking like there were the weirdest strikes, man. I mean, like I can understand like the newspaper strike. That one makes sense. And when there's a price disputes and all that, and the trolley strike I can understand because of the electricity problem. Listen, I don't know if I fully uh touched on what electricity was, but I'll put a picture here of like the power lines. The power lines were everywhere. They were like blocking the sky. And my dad also brought up a good point when I was talking about it to him, and he says they didn't have the power lines back then didn't have a protective coating, I'm sure. And he's right. And so if there was a power line that fell, people were going to get electrocuted. I mean, there was just so many problems with electricity back then. And so for the trolley workers to, it wasn't just about the pay and being replaced and everything. It was also just the idea of getting hurt on the job by this new invention. So, but I also, when it comes to the strikes, there's like the tailors and the dressmakers and all those. I can understand that. Again, Industrial Revolution, things were changing. I get it. But when there's like there was one that was like a barber strike. Yeah, these barbers went on strike. Why? I still don't. I read through it. I was like, what were they striking for? Were people just why? I don't understand that one. There was also a protest. This one was so funny to me. This one was in the 20s. And people actually protested, and it turned into like a violent thing. There were these people who were hired to be hat smashers. Okay, the boater hats were like a seasonal thing. Okay, people were so set on you had to wear things during a certain time, right? So people who and the men had decided that they wanted to wear these boater hats all year round. They didn't want to just wear them during the summer. It, and Boater hats are those straw hats with the with the ribbon around. And just to be more specific. So there were these protests, men wearing their hats after Labor Day, and there were actually gangs of kids with these bats smashing. What was going on? I just don't understand. Oh, good heavens. So yeah, I mean, like the Victorian, even some of the Edwardians, like I said, the 1920s, they had the hat smash. I think it was 1922. So gosh, that would have been 100 years ago. Uh, but but with all these protests and strikes and everything, Mary, she kind of nestled in after the Knights of Labor died out. She became, it says that she became involved with the United Mine Workers. And so she would continue to lead strikers and into picketing and encourage them. One thing she did was she told them to she encouraged striking workers to stay on strike when management brought in strike breakers and militias. And that could be good and bad. I mean, considering the Haymarket affair, which started as a peaceful protest and turned into this, I mean, people dying, you know, so yeah, there's that. On the plus side, I can see where she's coming from because there's a lot of times where management brings that stuff in just to intimidate. I mean, it's not really meant for anything. It's like, well, you see this muscle and it's scary, right? And yeah, and figure you're going to back down. So she was basically encouraging them not to back down. And I get it. But just considering the the Haymarket affair, yeah, it can be good and bad encouragement. Um, so strikers and protesters were becoming better organized, wasn't all over the place. I'm not going to say that it was just her because there were articles that I read and a lot of these, like here it's making it sound like she was the one that made strikers and everything more organized and produced greater results, such as better pay for workers and all this. I I'm sure she had a hand in it, of course. I mean, she's making a reputation off of helping these workers and getting what they want and all of that. But there were other people doing the same thing. I mean, you also consider that there were organizations and such as the Knights of Labor during the Industrial Revolution. So so yeah, I'm not going to take credit away from her, but you can't say that she was the only one doing this. No, not at all. Now, one thing that did catch my eye that I thought was absolutely hilarious, and every place that I looked said the exact same thing. Okay, now we get to the point where you have the suffragette movement happening, and you know the 19 they're trying to get votes for women and all that. And Mary Jones, by this point, she was Mother Jones. And the reason that she was called Mother Jones is because here she is. She looks like a sweet grandmother who was basically a badass when she got out there. But she was called Mother Jones because of the fact that she was out there with the strikers. I mean, there are pictures of her protesting on the she's in the forefront. I mean, so but so you would the suffragists hated her. Absolutely hated her. And so she separated herself from the activists. And one of her famous quotes is, "You don't need to vote to raise hell," which we'll see in later. Um, yeah, she opposed many of the activists because she believed it was more important to liberate the working class itself. The suffragists accused her of being anti-women's rights. She clearly articulated herself, saying, "I'm not an anti to anything which brings freedom to my class." So they butted heads. They really did. I mean, but here's what I have to say about it. Okay, she was doing her thing to help, and the suffragettes were doing their thing to help as well. I, to be honest, just stay in your lanes. And because yeah, I mean, the suffragettes were able to change history in their way, and Mother Jones was changing history in another way. Of course, I'm sure at the time it didn't seem like it. Yeah, by age 60, she had assumed the persona of Mother Jones by claiming to be older than she was, wearing outdated black dresses and referring to the male workers that she helped as her boys. The first reference to her in print as Mother Jones was in 1897. So, so, and there was a district attorney after the March of the Mill Workers, which we'll get to. It was a year after that that he said because she was in court and he pointed to her and said, "She is the most dangerous woman in America." So that tells you a lot about her reputation. Now, when it comes to the March of the Mill Children, and because there are so many books written about this uh, moment. So now at first, because it says in 1901, workers in the Pennsylvania silk mills went on strike. Now at first, I thought that this was another, like in the Midwest, when I saw silk mills. And but I think that was in the 1880s. And I wouldn't be surprised if she was part of that, because I know that those workers went on strike as well. So, but I will double check on all of that. And or maybe it is this one. I've looked at so much strike information, it's all blending. We have all seen the Lewis Hine pictures of the mill workers and the young women who worked there, eh, younger, I mean, from teenage down to younger than 10. Well, they went on strike because they wanted adult wages. And so Mother Jones came to help these girls. And how she did it was she actually, first of all, I love the things that she says. She did this whole thing of going through the streets and banging on pots and pans and saying, join the union and everything, making it clear that this is happening. Okay. And that these young ladies are going on strike. And she said that the young girls working in the mills were being robbed and demoralized. And she also said that the rich were denying these children the right to go to school in order to be able to pay for their own children's college tuitions. Now, you think about this. This is 1901. This is turn of the century. So basically, what she's saying is these children, these young ladies, deserve an education so that they can, in later years, so that they can graduate and then receive a career so that they can work. I mean, that's a bold statement right there. in 1901. And don't forget that she didn't finish her career. I mean, her education. I couldn't find anything that said that she, what kind of career she had in Ireland. You can, of course, I'll have to go through again and I'll put in the description box, but I didn't see anything about her education in just what she had in Canada. So it shows how much she cared for these kids. And I don't think that this was just one of those things where, you know, she was trying to, that she was about herself and trying to get her name in the paper. I really don't. So to further prove, because she was still butting heads with the mill owners, she went to another mill in New Jersey and then returned to Pennsylvania and gave a report on the conditions, saying that the conditions are like 1,000 times better than in New Jersey than they are here. Things like the child labor law is better enforced, for one thing, and there are more men at work than seen in the mills here. Okay, think about that for a second. Why does Pennsylvania need, why did the Pennsylvania mill need all these girls working, but New Jersey had men working? Now, it doesn't really say how, what the age group is, but she did mention labor laws. Then the mill owners, of course, responded with if the workers still insisted on a wage scale, they would not be able to do business while paying adult wages and would be forced to close. Basically, they would lose their jobs because the mill would close down, which I don't believe. I don't believe for a second that that's actually, I think they just didn't feel like, yeah. And that's the most pitiful excuse I've ever heard. Well, Mother Jones even encouraged the workers that she was standing with to accept the settlement because they did decide to settle. Now, if you remember when I did the video on the actual Newsy strike, Pulitzer and the Newsies compromised, and that's how the strike ended. So I mean, pretty much they settled. It doesn't say how they settled. The girls had to go back to the mills, and this is the point where Mother Jones fought for child labor alongside strike. She did the strike and worker, you know, worked with them. Now she's going to work for. So with that, 2 years after that, so that was 1901, and with that strike, it really sparked something with her. So in 1903, Mother Jones organized children who were working in mills and mines to participate in the famous March of the Mill Children. There are so, I'm not kidding, there are a lot of books that were written about this. I mean, you look at, and most of them are children's books because so these children, along with Mother Jones, they went from Kensington, Pennsylvania to the summer house. It also says, and summer White House of President Theodore Roosevelt on Long Island in Oyster Bay, New York. So I guess that there's a rhyme that goes where it talks about it mentions Oyster Bay. It talks about walking along and everything. Yeah. A lot of these events and stories have rhymes, just like the Chicago fire that I mentioned. But anyway, now here's the absolute genius of Mother Jones. So these kids are doing this march. They have banners and signs that say things like we want to go to school. We don't want to be in the mines. We don't want to work, and as they're marching, every night when they're in a new town, they hold like rallies and um, they have like music and skits. There's speeches. Well, you think about it. If you were an everyday citizen and you saw a spectacle like that, you saw these kids who were putting on, I don't know, maybe a puppet show, and you'd be interested, wouldn't you? You had these skits and this rally and this singing and the music and these speeches. Shoot, I would go see it. I'd look to see what had them interested. And so the only form of any kind of media was the newspaper at this time. Radios didn't exist yet. Radio was in its infancy. They were still trying to work out all the kinks to it. Yeah, because radio actually was officially invented in like 1898 or something, but it wasn't official until the late Edwardian. I think it was like after World War I or something. So really, yeah, newspaper was what they had. So all this is going on, but the problem is newspapers wouldn't wouldn't run anything about this. One thing I absolutely fell in love with when it came to uh, Mother Mary. I mean, Mother Jones. Her name is Mary, so I guess. Lewis Hine, I talk about him a lot on this channel, and would he documented what these kids went through. He showed these kids with lost fingers and who lost an arm and with other disabilities, and he would constantly shove it into Congress's face and say, look what's happening to these poor children. This needs to stop. Okay, well, Mother Jones was another one. She was a battle axe because these poor kids, again, she made it very clear that these children were missing fingers. They had disabilities. And she tried really hard to make the newspapers print this. Not only that these kids were dealing with this, but also the bad conditions of working in these mills. The mill owners had stock in most of the newspapers. And so, of course, these newspapermen figured that was going to be the end of it, right? Said, well, we can't publish anything about child labor or whatever you're doing here, and told her why. She says, well, I've got stock in these little children and I'll arrange a little publicity. Now, she asked for permission to see President Theodore Roosevelt, and she was denied. She then wrote a letter asking for a meeting and never received an answer. And the president refused to meet with the marchers, these young children. And what's funny is this entire incident brought the issue of child labor to the forefront. Suddenly, everybody knew about it. It's like they were trying so hard, the big shots were trying so hard to hide it. Like, no, it's not a big deal. And this helped really push it forward. Like, yeah, this is a problem. Now, there is a book, a nonfiction book, and I'll put the information in the description box. It was released in 2003. It's called Kids on Strike, and it describes this crusade in detail. So I'll make sure to have all that for you in the description box, the author and everything. She's not finished. No, when she decided to campaign for the rest of her life, she wasn't kidding. I believe at this point she's like in her late 70s, early 80s. There was a strike in 1912, and it was called the Paint Creek Cabin Creek Strike, and this was in West Virginia. And there was these are mine workers, and there was like a shooting war between, so it was violent, absolutely violent. So, she shows up, and because of what happened there, she was accused of conspiring to commit murder. And there were other charges as well. Uh, she refused, and she was sentenced to 20 years in the state penitentiary. I mean, you think this woman, she's an old woman, and she's going to prison. Um, but I've read up on this particular strike, and it was pretty bad. I'll of course put the information in, and I mean, I don't. That's one that I don't understand why she was there. You know, that's one of those moments. So she, bless her heart. I mean, I understand her wanting, because of for the cause and what she did and everything. But I don't know. I mean, because of the safety thing, she didn't need to be there. She really didn't need to be there. But, I, I don't know. It was a different time. What do I know? Oh, good heavens. She, she had a wild life, and I love her to pieces. I really do. The more I read about her, but she ended up in jail again. Um, there was another strike that she was at, and that was the next year. It was a mine worker. Yeah. That was in Colorado. United Mine Workers of America strike. And it was in at a Rockefeller owned company. And I guess she just missed. Let me see what it says here. Yeah, she was arrested, serving time in prison, and was escorted prior to the Ludlow massacre. So, like I said, um, despite all this, though, um, going to jail and this massacre incident and all this, she she claimed to have a telegram from President Warren Harding offering to work to end the private police in West Virginia if they returned home. And when the UMW president Frank Keeney demanded to see the telegram, Mother Jones refused, and he denounced her as a fake because she refused to show anyone the telegram, and the president's secretary denied ever having sent one. She was suspected of having fabricated the story. And then she reportedly suffered a nervous breakdown. So, I mean, yeah, by this point, she needs to retire. You've been in jail twice. And I mean, when you're starting to tell tall tales, you need to step back. She's led an eventful life, and I mean, but I don't blame the guy for calling her a fake when she's trying to say and won't even show the telegram or anything. So now she continued to be a union organizer into the 20s. There's actually pictures of her with Calvin Coolidge, the president after Harding, with him and his wife. Yeah, Coolidge is my favorite president. You know, he's the silent one. And I talked about him in the 1920s podcast episode that I did. And his wife is a hoot. But anyway, there's pictures of her standing with uh, President Coolidge, so that is true. There's photographic proof of that. And she did write her autobiography, like I said, in 1925. And it's all about her experiences in the labor movement. So I'm actually interested in reading that. I'll have to find that and pick that up. And I would love to hear from her personally, the whole thing with the suffragettes. I want to hear her what she has to say about them, right? I don't know why that cracks me up so much, but it really does. I have nothing against the whole suffragette movement. Like I said, it changed history, and that's a good thing. The fact that she got under their skin and they got under her skin just makes me. I just think it's so funny. Oh Lordy. Oh goodness, goodness. So in her later years, she lived with her friends on their farm in what is now Adelphi, Maryland, or Adelphi. I'm sorry if I said it incorrectly. She celebrated her self-proclaimed 100th birthday in 1930 and was filmed making a statement for a newsreel. I'll try and find the newsreel and put it in the description box. If I can't find it, then um, but that's funny. Self-proclaimed 100th birthday, but she actually lived, it says, according to everything I found, that she died in her 90s. So oh, gotta love this woman. You know, gotta love it. Okay. Well, there is like it says, she died in 1930. Uh, what was then Silver Spring, Maryland, now is Adelphi or Adelphi. I'm sorry if I'm saying it incorrectly. I do apologize. It says here that she is buried in the Union Miners Cemetery in Mount Olive, Illinois, alongside miners who died in the 1898 Battle of Virden. She called these miners killed in strike-related violence her boys. So that's where she is. That's where she's been laid to rest. But there's also, I also saw where there is an elementary school. Yeah, where did I see that? The farm where she died began to advertise itself as the Mother Jones Rest Home in 1932 before being sold to a Baptist church in 1956. The site is now marked with a Maryland Historical Trust marker, and a nearby elementary school is named in her honor. So there is that. So that is Mary Harris, also known as Mother Jones. She is famous for her March of the Mill Children